The great chamber stretched before Ambassador Dongwook like a dark ocean. Above him, 12 massive seats rose in a circle, each one holding a creature that could destroy entire worlds with a word. The Galactic Council had ruled the galaxy for 10,000 years, and today they would decide the fate of humanity. Dongwook stood alone in the center of the chamber. His simple black suit looked tiny compared to the towering aliens around him, but he kept his back straight and his eyes forward. Behind him, empty seats marked where other species once stood to receive their judgment. None of them had ever left this chamber as free people. The chamber walls glowed with a soft blue light that came from no visible source. Strange symbols moved across the walls like living things, telling the history of the Council's endless victories. Every species in the galaxy had a symbol here. Every species had bowed down. High Counselor Vextar spoke first. The crystalline being towered 15 feet tall, its body made of what looked like living diamond. When it spoke, its voice sounded like breaking glass mixed with winter wind. "Human," Vextar said, the word dripping with disgust. "You stand before the council that has brought peace to 10 billion worlds. We have ended wars. We have stopped chaos. We have created order from the darkness between stars." Dongwook nodded politely but said nothing. His grandmother had taught him that sometimes the best response was to let others talk first. She had been a wise woman who survived wars on Earth by understanding when to speak and when to listen. Counselor Zephyr leaned forward next. The massive reptilian creature had scales that shifted color with his emotions. Right now, they showed deep red anger. "Your species has grown too fast, human. You consume too much. You ask too many questions. You refuse to follow the natural order." Around the chamber, other council members shifted in their seats. The aquatic Merthani representative floated in a tank of green water, her gills fluttering with what might have been amusement. The Click-Tor delegate clicked its mandibles in a rhythm that sounded almost like laughter. They had all been through this process before, first as victims, then as judges. Humanity has spread to 47 systems in less than 300 years, continued another voice. This came from Counselor Nethara, a being of pure energy that appeared as dancing lights inside a containment field. Most species take 2,000 years to achieve such expansion. You move too quickly. You change too much. You threaten stability. Dongwook finally spoke. "We explore because we are curious. We expand because we dream of better homes for our children. Is that wrong?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Several council members exchanged looks. In all their thousands of years, few species had ever asked them to justify their decisions. Vextar's crystal body flared brighter. "Wrong? Right? These are meaningless concepts, human. There is only order and chaos. We maintain order. You bring chaos. Therefore, you must be controlled." "Controlled how?" Dongwook asked. He already knew the answer, but he wanted to hear them. "Say it." Counselor Mordek spoke for the first time. The shadow-wrapped being existed in a space between dimensions, its form shifting like black smoke. "Return to your home system, human. Stay there. Never leave again. Accept council oversight of your technology, your birth rates, your thoughts. Learn to fear as others have learned." "And if we refuse?" The chamber fell silent. In 10,000 years, no species had ever asked that question during a formal judgment. The concept of refusal was so foreign that several translators struggled. To convert the word into other languages, Zephyr's scales shifted to deep purple, a color that meant death in his species. "Then you will serve as an example. We will burn your worlds. We will scatter your people across the galaxy as slaves. We will ensure that your children's children remember why fear of the Council is the most important lesson in the universe." "We have done this before, human," added Vextar. "The Zenthari once refused our judgment. Their home world is now a ball of glass that orbits their dead star. The Corvani thought they could resist. We turned their people into servants who beg for the chance to die. The Yulani believed they were special. Their species exists now only in council laboratories, studied like insects. Dongwook listened to each word carefully. He thought of his wife Minseo back on Earth, probably reading bedtime stories to their daughter right now. He thought of the children playing in parks on New Sol Colony, laughing as they chased each other under alien stars. He thought of human scientists making discoveries that could help everyone in the galaxy, and human artists creating beauty that spoke to hearts across species lines. You give us two choices, Dongwook said slowly. Submit or die. Exactly, Vextar replied. Choose. Quickly. Our patience grows thin. Dongwook reached into his pocket and pulled out a small device. It looked like nothing more than a simple communication unit, the kind tourists use to call home from distant planets. But this device had been specially modified by Earth's best engineers. I have a message from the United Governments of Humanity, he announced. The council members leaned forward, expecting to hear words of surrender. Every species eventually begged for mercy once they understood the true scope of council power. Some took longer than others, but they all broke eventually. Dongwook activated the device and spoke clearly into it, his words being broadcast to every human colony, every ship, every settlement across 47 star systems. The Galactic Council demands our submission or promises our destruction. They believe fear will force us to crawl before them as others have done. They think we will choose slavery over freedom, safety over dignity, existence over honor. He paused, looking up at each council member in turn. We decline both options. The device in his hand began transmitting a pre-recorded message in the clear, strong voice of President Chen Ho speaking from Earth itself. To the Galactic Council, humanity thanks you for making your intentions clear. You have shown us exactly who you are and what you represent. You rule through fear and call it peace. You crush freedom and call it order. You demand submission and call it wisdom. The council members began to rise from their seats, their various forms radiating anger and disbelief. We reject your ultimatum. We reject your authority. We reject the idea that might makes right or that fear should govern the galaxy. If you come for us, you will find us ready. If you want war, we will give you war, but we will never bow to tyrants, no matter how powerful they claim to be. Dongwook switched off the device and looked up at the council with calm eyes. Operation Defiance has begun, he said simply. Security forces moved to arrest him, but Dongwook activated a personal shield generator. He had perhaps 30 seconds before they broke through it. You think you know what humans are, he called out as energy weapons began firing at his shield. You think we are just another species to be broken and controlled. You are about to learn how wrong you are. The shield failed, and darkness took him. But his message was already spreading across the galaxy, carried by hidden human transmitters and sympathetic aliens who had grown tired of living in fear. The council thought they had just heard another species choose suicide over submission. They were about to discover that sometimes when humans say no, they really mean it. 3 months had passed since Ambassador Dongwook disappeared into council custody. 3 months of silence from the Galactic Council while humanity prepared for the storm they knew was coming. Every human colony worked day and night building defenses, training soldiers, and saying goodbye to loved ones. Admiral Tae-ho stood on the bridge of the battleship Indomitable, watching the empty space at the edge of the Sol system. His weathered face showed no emotion, but his hands gripped the command rail tightly. Behind him, 200 human ships waited in formation. It was the largest fleet humanity had ever assembled, and everyone knew it might not be enough. "Sir," called Lieutenant Park from the sensor station. "Multiple contacts appearing on long-range scanners. They're big, Admiral, really big." Tae-ho nodded grimly. "How many?" 1,000 ships confirmed. maybe more still jumping in. A whistle of amazement came from somewhere on the bridge, 1,000 council ships against 200 human vessels. The numbers were not encouraging, but Tae-ho had not expected fair odds. The council ruled through overwhelming force, not clever tactics. "Open a channel to all ships," Tae-ho commanded. "This is Admiral Tae-ho to all human forces. Today we face an enemy that has conquered every species in the galaxy. They expect us to surrender when we see their numbers. They expect us to beg for mercy when we witness their power. They expect us to break like all the others." He paused, looking out at the vast enemy fleet now visible on the main screen. The council ships looked like floating cities, each one larger than anything humanity had ever built. Their hulls gleamed with energy shields that could deflect asteroids. Weapon ports glowed with power that could crack planets. "We will show them what humans do when we are afraid. We fight harder." Captain Sunja heard those words on the bridge of the destroyer Fearless. She was 32 years old and had never commanded a ship in real battle before. Her hands shook slightly as she gripped her command chair, but her voice stayed steady when she spoke to her crew. "You heard the Admiral," she announced over the ship's communication system. "The enemy wants to scare us into giving up. Well, I have news for them. My grandmother lived through the siege of Busan during the Korean War. She used to tell me that being scared just meant you were still alive and still fighting." Laughter rippled through the ship. Corporal Min-ho, manning one of the gun turrets, called out over the comm channel, "My grandmother told scarier bedtime stories than these aliens look. At least she had good special effects." More laughter echoed across the human fleet. On dozens of ships, crews began sharing jokes and stories about their grandmothers, their fears, and their determination to protect everything they loved. C. Council fleet moved into attack formation with mechanical precision. At the center of their formation, the massive command ship Dominion began broadcasting on all frequencies. The voice that emerged spoke in perfect human language, cold and emotionless. "Human vessels, you are ordered to power down your weapons and prepare to be boarded. Your species has been judged and found guilty of defying council authority. Surrender now and your deaths will be swift." Captain Sunja looked around her bridge at the young faces of her crew. Communications officer Hee-jin was barely 25. Weapons specialist Jun Seo had just become a father 3 months ago. Navigator Min Kyung still kept pictures of her childhood dog on her console. "This is Captain Sunja of the human destroyer Fearless responding to council demands," she broadcast back. "You want to teach us fear? Let us show you what humans do when we are afraid. We fight harder, we protect each other, and we never give up. Come and take our freedom if you can." The first council attack came without warning. Massive energy beams lanced out from their ships, weapons designed to disable enemy vessels while keeping crews alive for interrogation. The beams struck human ships with devastating force, but something strange happened. Instead of surrendering, the damaged human vessels kept firing back. The destroyer Courage took a direct hit that knocked out half her systems. Instead of requesting aid, Captain Dong-soo rerouted power from life support to weapons and kept shooting. "A ship can fly on minimal life support," he announced calmly, "but she cannot fight without guns." The council tried their next tactic. Specialized ships began broadcasting terror frequencies, psychic attacks designed to fill enemy crews with overwhelming dread. These weapons had never failed before. Every species in the galaxy had primitive fear responses that could be triggered and amplified until entire crews collapsed in panic. The terror waves washed over the human fleet. On the bridge of the Indomitable, Admiral Tae-ho felt the attack hit his mind like a physical blow. Images of death and destruction flooded his thoughts. Visions of Earth burning, of his family screaming, of humanity scattered and enslaved. He gritted his teeth and forced himself to think of something else. His daughter Soo-jin learning to ride a bicycle in their backyard, falling down and getting back up with a determined smile. "Fear is just another enemy," he said aloud, "and we do not surrender to enemies." Across the human fleet, similar scenes played out. The terror weapons that had broken the will of countless species crashed against human minds like waves against stone. Crew members felt afraid, certainly, but they used that fear as fuel for their anger. "Is that supposed to be scary?" Corporal Minho called out from his gun turret as nightmarish visions filled his head. "I have watched horror movies that were worse than this." The Council fleet began to show confusion. Their terror weapons were operating at maximum power, but the human ships continued fighting. If anything, they seemed to be fighting with more determination than before. Counselor Vextar observed the battle from the command ship's bridge, his crystal body flickering with uncertainty. "Impossible," he said to his tactical officer. "No species has ever resisted the fear projectors. Increase power to maximum." "Sir, we are already at maximum power. The humans appear to be immune." "Not immune," Vextar corrected grimly. "They feel the fear. Our sensors confirm it. They are simply choosing to ignore it." The battle intensified. Council ships closed in, expecting easy victories against smaller human vessels. The destroyer Valiant found itself surrounded by 3 massive Council cruisers. Captain Kyung-ho knew his ship could not escape. "All hands," he announced over the ship's speakers. "We cannot win this fight, but we can make them remember us. Engineering, set the reactor for overload. Navigation, plot a course for the enemy flagship. Communications, send a message to the fleet." The message that went out was simple. The crew of the Valiant died free. Make our sacrifice count. The destroyer plunged toward the Council flagship like a spear of fire. At the last second, Captain Kyung-ho activated the ship's communication system one final time. The sound that emerged was not a cry of fear or despair, but human voices raised in an old song of defiance that had carried their ancestors through dark times. The Valiant struck the flagship's shields and exploded in a bloom of nuclear fire. The shields held, but the impact sent shockwaves through both fleets. For the first time in 10,000 years, a Council ship had been forced to retreat from an attack. Admiral Tae-ho watched the explosion and felt pride mix with grief in his chest. "All ships," he commanded. "Remember the Valiant. Remember why we fight. Fear is just another word for respect, and we will earn theirs." The human fleet charged forward into the heart of the enemy formation. They were outnumbered 5-1, outgunned and fighting for their very survival. But they were no longer afraid. They were angry. The news traveled faster than light across the galaxy. For the first time in 10,000 years, the Galactic Council had retreated from battle. Species that had lived under Council rule for countless generations heard the impossible story and dared to whisper one word they had forgotten: hope. On the mining world of Kepler 442b, deep beneath the planet's red surface, the Vortak slaves stopped their endless digging when the news arrived. These reptilian beings had once been proud warriors before the Council broke their spirit and forced them into the mines. Now they lived in darkness, extracting precious metals for their masters, while their children grew up never seeing sunlight. Engineer Hyun-soo crouched in the main tunnel with his human technical team, watching as Vortak workers gathered around their communication devices. The aliens' eyes, adapted for darkness after generations underground, reflected the blue glow of the screens with something that looked like wonder. "Is it true?" asked Gorth, the Vortak overseer who had become friends with the human engineers over the past year. His voice carried barely above a whisper, as if speaking too loudly might make the miracle disappear. "Did your people really make the Council run away?" Hyun-soo nodded, feeling the weight of history in that simple gesture. "They tried to scare us into surrendering. We said no." Around them, hundreds of Vortak workers had stopped mining. They stood in the tunnels they had carved with their own claws, listening to reports of the battle at Seoul. Many of them had never heard of humans before this day, but now they spoke the word like a prayer. "But how?" Gorth asked, his clawed hands shaking. "The Council has weapons that can destroy stars. They have ships larger than our cities. They have powers that can reach into your mind and fill it with terror until you cannot think or move or breathe." "Fear only works if you let it," Hyun-soo replied, remembering words his grandfather had spoken during the dark days on Earth when their family fled from war. "Your people have been afraid for so long, you have forgotten you have claws." The change began slowly. A Vortak worker named Keth straightened his shoulders for the first time in decades. Another alien, Mordak, looked up at the tunnel ceiling as if seeing it clearly for the first time. Whispers spread through the mining complex like water finding. "Cracks in stone? We have claws," Keth said wonderingly, looking down at his hands. "We have claws and teeth, and we know every tunnel on this world better than any council overseer." 3 days later, when council enforcers arrived to investigate reports of seditious thoughts among the Vortak, they found empty mines. The slaves had vanished into the planet's deep cavern systems, guided by human engineers who understood that tunnels could be weapons as well as prisons. Similar scenes played out across 17 star systems. On the ocean world of Merthani Prime, the aquatic beings who had spent centuries delivering tribute from their vast underwater cities began asking new questions. Why should they give their most beautiful pearls to aliens who lived in the cold vacuum of space? Why should their children go hungry so that council members could feast? Dr. Eun-jung, a human xenopsychologist who had been studying with the Merthani University, watched as the Sea Dwellers held their first secret council meeting in 1,000 years. The Great Hall was carved from living coral, its walls pulsing, with bioluminescent patterns that showed the emotional state of every speaker. "The humans showed us something we had forgotten," declared Merthani Elder Thal Asia, her voice carrying through the water with the authority of great age. "They showed us that the most powerful weapon in the galaxy is not a star-killer beam or a terror projector. It is the word no." The patterns on the walls shifted to show agreement from hundreds of Merthani gathered in the depths. These beings had once controlled currents and commanded sea storms before the council taught them to fear the empty darkness between worlds. Now they remembered what they had been before fear made them small. Even more shocking was the response from the Kliktor, hive worlds. These insect-like beings had served the council for 3,000 years, their collective minds perfectly suited for following orders without question. But collective minds, Dr. Eun-jung realized, could also share new ideas very quickly. On Kliktor Prime, Queen Zixara felt the change ripple through her billions of children like electricity through water. The concept of rebellion had entered the hive mind, carried by a single worker who had overheard human traders discussing their victory against the council. The idea spread from worker to soldier to queen in a matter of hours. Suddenly, every Kliktor in the galaxy was asking the same question. If humans could say no to the council, why could they not do the same? The queen's response was simple and devastating. She stopped the breeding programs that had supplied council armies with perfect soldiers for millennia. Without Kliktor troops, the council's ability to enforce their will across the galaxy began to crumble. Even the energy beings called the Lumina began to change. These ancient creatures existed as pure thought and light, making them nearly impossible to threaten with conventional weapons. But the Council had found ways to bind their energy forms, forcing them to power Council technology like living batteries. On the artificial world of Nexus Station, thousands of Lumina had been trapped in containment fields for centuries. They provided power for the station's massive computers, their life force slowly draining away to serve their captors. Most had forgotten what it felt like to move freely through space, as they had done in ages past. Then one of them, an entity called Brightwing, received a transmission from a human scientist named Dr. Min Jung, who was studying energy-based life forms. The message was simple. We know you are prisoners. We know you want to be free. We are coming. The words ignited something in Brightwing that had been sleeping for 1,000 years. Freedom. Choice. The right to exist without serving others. These concepts spread through the Lumina community like wildfire, their energy forms flickering in patterns that spelled defiance in ancient galactic script. But perhaps the most important change was happening in the minds of ordinary beings across the galaxy. On 100 worlds, in 1,000 cities, members of species who had lived under council rule for generations began to remember stories their grandparents had told about the time before the conquest. A young Zenthari named Kelvon, whose people had been the first to fall to council might, found an old recording hidden in his family's belongings. It showed his great-grandfather speaking to a crowd of rebels, his voice strong and unafraid. They can break our bodies, but they cannot break our spirits unless we let them. A Corvani child discovered cave paintings that showed her ancestors as proud warriors rather than the broken servants they had become. The paintings depicted battles against star gods, showing that even defeat could be met with honor. Dr. Eunjung compiled reports from across the galaxy and made a discovery that changed everything. The Council's power is not really military, she transmitted to Earth in her final report before disappearing into the underground resistance. It is psychological. They have built their empire on learned helplessness. Every species believes they are weak because the Council told them so, and they believed it. But humans never learned that lesson because we were never conquered. We know that being afraid and giving up are two completely different things, and now we are teaching that lesson to the rest of the galaxy. The Council realized their mistake too late. In trying to make an example of humanity, they had created something far more dangerous than another conquered species. They had created hope. And hope, as they were about to learn, was more contagious than any plague, and more destructive than any weapon they possessed. The galaxy was waking up, and it was angry. The council chambers had never seen such chaos. High Counselor Vextar's crystalline body flickered with angry red light as reports flooded in from across the galaxy. 17 star systems in open rebellion. The Vortak mining operations completely shut down. The Murthani refusing to pay tribute. The Clicktor breeding program stopped cold. "This is impossible!" Counselor Zephyr roared, his massive reptilian form pacing back and forth. "One battle! One victory by a primitive species, and suddenly the entire galaxy thinks it can defy us." Counselor Nethara, the energy being who flickered like contained lightning, spoke with barely controlled rage. "It is worse than defiance. It is hope. Hope spreads faster than any virus we have ever encountered." The other council members shifted uneasily in their seats. Some had ruled for 5,000 years. Others had held power since before humans learned to make fire. None of them had ever faced a crisis like this. "We must act quickly," declared Counselor Mordak, his shadow-wrapped form seeming to absorb light from the chamber. "Every day wait. More species join this rebellion. Soon they will realize they outnumber us 1,000,000 to 1. Vextar's crystal body brightened as he reached a decision that would doom them all. "Prepare the fear engine." The chamber fell silent. Even among the council, the fear engine was spoken of in whispers. It was their ultimate weapon, a space station the size of a small moon that could broadcast pure terror across entire star systems. No species had ever resisted its influence. No mind had ever remained sane after exposure to its full power. "Are you certain?" asked Counselor Yathara, a floating jellyfish-like being whose tentacles glowed with bioluminescent worry patterns. "The fear engine has not been used in over 2,000 years. The last time we activated it, 3 star systems went completely insane. Their populations are still screaming. Better screaming slaves than free rebels," Vexitar replied coldly. "We will position the station at the edge of the Sol system and demonstrate what happens to species that refuse to kneel." When Earth's population is reduced to gibbering madness, the rest of the galaxy will remember why they fear us. The fear engine moved slowly through hyperspace, its massive bulk requiring tremendous energy to transport. The station was a nightmare of Council engineering, its hull covered in psychic amplifiers and terror broadcasters. At its core sat the Scream Chamber, where the tortured minds of 100 different species had been connected to create the most horrifying thoughts possible. Council. Executor Malthanor oversaw the weapon's activation from the station's command center. He was older than most civilizations, a being of pure malice who had personally overseen the breaking of 50 species. His form shifted constantly between shadow and substance, as if reality itself rejected his presence. Target confirmed, reported. The station's tactical officer, a mind-wiped slave whose thoughts had been replaced with pure obedience. Sol system, third planet, population approximately 12 billion humans. Excellent, Malthanor whispered, his voice like wind through a graveyard. Charge the primary array to maximum power. Let us show these upstart humans what true fear looks like. But Captain Ye-Jin had other plans. Her stealth ship Ghost Rider had been tracking the fear engine for 3 days, hidden in the sensor shadow of a nearby asteroid field. Ye-Jin was 41 years old and had spent half her life preparing for missions that everyone hoped would never come. Today she volunteered to die so that Earth might live. Ghost Rider to Sol Command, she transmitted on a coded frequency. Fear engine confirmed in position. Beginning infiltration run. The response came immediately from Admiral Tejo himself. Captain, you know this is a one-way mission. The station's defenses will destroy you the moment they detect your ship. Understood. Sir, Ye-Jin replied, checking her ship's stealth systems one final time. But they have to detect us first. Behind her, in the small ship's cargo bay, Corporal Wu Jin finished arming the nuclear charges they had brought. He was barely 25 years old and had joined the mission because his sister lived on Earth with her 3 children. If we are going to die, he said with a grin that did not quite hide his fear. Let us make it count for something. The Ghost Rider approached the fear engine like a whisper of wind, her stealth systems straining to hide the ship from sensors designed to detect entire fleets. Captain Ye-Jin had trained for this kind of flying her entire career, but she had never attempted to sneak past defenses this advanced. Sweat beaded on her forehead as proximity alarms began to sound. The station's automated defense systems were starting to notice something was wrong, even if they could not identify exactly what. Almost there, she whispered to her crew of 5 volunteers. 30 seconds to docking. Those 30 seconds felt like 30 years. Every heartbeat echoed like thunder in the small ship. Every breath sounded loud enough to give them away. But somehow, impossibly, they reached the station's outer hull without being detected. Meanwhile, on Earth, something unprecedented was happening. The fear engine had begun its attack, broadcasting waves of concentrated terror toward the planet below. The psychic assault was designed to reduce entire populations to screaming madness, to fill every mind with such overwhelming dread that rational thought became impossible. The waves struck Earth like an invisible tsunami of horror. Every human on the planet felt it hit them at the same moment. Mothers holding their children suddenly saw visions of those children dying in terrible ways. Students in classrooms found their minds filled with images of cosmic horrors that existed between the stars. Farmers working in fields collapsed as nightmares invaded their waking thoughts. But then something extraordinary happened. Instead of screaming and running in panic, people began gathering. In Seoul, citizens poured into the streets and began singing traditional songs that their ancestors had used to drive away evil spirits. In New York, strangers linked arms and formed human chains of defiance. In Lagos, children held hands while their parents told them stories of heroes who faced monsters and won. Teacher So Young stood in front of her classroom as waves of terror crashed against her mind. Her students, ranging in age from 6 to 12, looked at her with frightened eyes, as nightmarish visions tried to take hold of their thoughts. "Fear is trying to teach you that you are small and helpless," she told them, her voice steady despite the cosmic horror clawing at her sanity. "But humans have always been afraid of the dark, and we learned to make fire anyway." She reached into her desk and pulled out a simple candle, lighting it with shaking hands. The small flame seemed impossibly bright in the classroom that had grown dim with psychic shadow. "Fear is just darkness trying to make you forget about light," she continued as her students gathered around the candle. "But we remember. We always remember how to make light." Across Earth, similar scenes played, out in millions of variations. The terror weapon that had broken countless species crashed against human minds like waves against a seawall. People felt afraid, certainly, but they used that fear as motivation to protect each other, rather than reasons to surrender. Captain Yejin and her team fought through the fear engine's automated defenses, moving toward the station's core like ghosts made of determination and despair. They lost 2 team members to security drones, but Corporal Wu Jin reached the scream chamber with his nuclear charges intact. "Yejin to Earth," the captain transmitted, as alarms began blaring throughout the station. "We are too late to stop the weapon, but we can make sure it never fires again." The charges detonated just as the fear engine reached maximum power. The explosion tore through the station's core, but the psychic weapon had already fired its full payload at Earth. The beam of concentrated terror struck the planet like a hammer blow of pure nightmare. It carried the screams of dying worlds, the whispers of cosmic entities that existed in the spaces between atoms, the collective fears of every species the Council had ever broken, and it bounced off. Humanity's collective refusal to be controlled by fear had created something the Council had never encountered, a species immune to their greatest weapon. The terror that should have driven 12 billion humans insane instead rolled off them like water off glass. High Counselor Vextar watched the readings from his command ship and felt something he had not experienced in 10,000 years of absolute power. He felt afraid. "Impossible," he whispered, as his crystal body flickered with uncertainty. "No species has ever resisted the fear engine at full power." "Sir," his tactical officer reported, "the humans appear to be laughing." And they were. Across Earth, people, who had just survived the most terrifying psychic assault in galactic history, were laughing with relief, with joy, and with the sudden understanding that they were truly free. The Council's greatest weapon had failed. For the first time in their long reign, they had no idea what to do next. 6 months after the fear engine failed, the galaxy had changed beyond recognition. The Council's iron grip was crumbling as species after species threw off chains they had worn for thousands of years. But something else was happening that no one had expected. Instead of chaos and endless war, a new kind of order was emerging. General Kyung-min stood on the bridge of the flagship Unity, leading a fleet unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Human ships flew alongside Vortak mining vessels that had been converted into warships. Murthani bioships moved through space like living creatures, their crews singing war songs in languages older than the Council. Clicktor swarm fighters buzzed around the larger vessels like protective insects, their hive minds coordinating perfectly with human tactical computers. "Target acquired," reported Navigator Sung Hee from her station. "Dominion Prime, capital, world of the Galactic Council. Population approximately 50 million, mostly Council members and their servants." Kyung-min nodded grimly. After months of fighting across the galaxy, they had finally reached the heart of the enemy empire. But, unlike the Council, who ruled through fear and overwhelming force, humanity had come with a different kind of weapon. "Open a channel to the planet," he commanded. The main screen flickered to life, showing the crystal spires and floating platforms that made up the Council's capital city. It was a place of cold beauty, designed to inspire awe and submission in visitors from conquered worlds. Today, it would hear something new. Ambassador Jiwoo stepped forward, her diplomatic uniform simple and practical compared to the elaborate robes that council members typically wore. She had been chosen for this moment because of her ability to speak clearly and honestly, even when facing impossible odds. "Citizens of Dominion Prime," she began, her voice carrying to every communication device on the planet. "We are here not as conquerors, but as liberators. For 10,000 years, the Galactic Council has ruled through fear, crushing the hopes and dreams of countless species. Today, that ends. We offer you a choice that the Council never gave to others. Surrender your weapons and join us in building something better. Transform your empire of fear into a democracy where every voice matters. Replace your rule of terror with cooperation and mutual respect." The response came quickly from the planet's surface. High Counselor Vextar's crystalline form appeared on screen, his body flickering with angry red light. "You think your naive idealism can replace 10,000 years of proven order?" His voice cracked like breaking glass. "Fear keeps the peace, humans. Fear prevents war. Fear maintains stability across a galaxy that would otherwise tear itself." Apart in endless conflict, General Kyung-min stepped beside Ambassador Jiwoo. "Fear does not prevent war, Counselor. It just delays it until someone finally says no. We are saying no." Around the capital world, the combined fleet of free species waited. They had the firepower to reduce the planet to ash. But that was not why they had come. Humanity had learned something during their rise to the stars that the Council never understood. True power came not from the ability to destroy, but from the ability to build. "You have 1 hour to decide," Jiwoo announced. "Surrender peacefully and help us create a new government where all species have equal representation, or continue fighting and face the consequences of your choices." The hour that followed was the longest in galactic history. On Dominion Prime, the Council members gathered in emergency session. Some, like Counselor Zephyr, called for a final battle that would either restore their power or destroy everything. Others, like Counselor Ythara, wondered if perhaps the humans were offering something that might actually work better than fear. "Look around you," Ythara said, her jellyfish-like form pulsing with thoughtful colors. "Our empire is crumbling. Species that served us faithfully for thousands of years have turned against us. Our greatest weapons have failed. Perhaps it's time to consider that we were wrong." "Wrong?" Zephyr's scales turned deep purple with rage. "We brought order to chaos. We ended the species wars that raged before our rule. We created the longest period of peace in galactic history." "We created the peace of the grave," replied Counselor Nethara, her energy form flickering sadly. "Yes, there was no war between species, but only because we had broken their spirits so completely they forgot how to fight. That is not peace. That is death of the soul." The debate raged for 59 minutes. In the end, it was High Counselor Vextar himself who made the final decision. "We will not surrender our power to primitives and rebels," he declared. "Activate all remaining defense systems. If we must die, we will die as rulers, not as equals." The orbital defense platforms around Dominion Prime powered up their weapons. Ancient shield generators that had protected the capital for millennia hummed to life. The Council's personal guard, mind-wiped soldiers who felt no fear and knew no mercy, prepared for their final battle. But humanity had not come this far to simply destroy their enemies. "All ships, implement Operation New Dawn," General Kyung-min commanded. Instead of attacking the planet's defenses, the combined fleet began, broadcasting on every frequency. The signals they sent were not weapons or threats, but something far more dangerous to the Council's power: information. Every citizen on Dominion Prime suddenly had access to the real history of the galaxy. They learned about species that had been erased from official records. They discovered the truth about worlds that had been destroyed not for rebellion, but for simply asking questions. They saw footage of the Council's prison worlds, where entire populations lived in conditions designed to break their spirits. But most importantly, they learned about the alternative that humanity was offering. Captain J. Juan piloted his fighter through the defensive fire around the planet, not to attack, but to drop communication satellites that would ensure every being on Dominion Prime could hear the truth. His ship took damage from energy cannons, but he completed his mission, knowing that information was more powerful than any weapon. Citizens of the galaxy, the broadcast began, narrated by voices from dozens of different species. You have lived in fear for so long that you have forgotten what hope feels like. You have accepted slavery so completely that you think freedom is impossible. But we are here to show you another way. The transmission showed images from the worlds that had already been liberated. Former slaves working together as equals, species that had been enemies for thousands of years, sharing technology and resources. Children from a dozen different worlds playing together in schools where no one was taught to hate or fear. This is not a promise of what might be, the narrator continued. This is what already exists. This is what you can have if you choose to take it. On the planet's surface, something unprecedented began to happen. Council servants, the mind-wiped, slaves who had served without question for generations, began to remember who they had been before their thoughts were taken away. The information broadcasts included techniques that human neuroscientists had developed to restore damaged minds, and these techniques worked even on the Council's most thoroughly controlled subjects. A servant named Kolrath, who had been a Xanthari, poet before his mind was wiped, suddenly remembered the words to songs he had written about freedom. A guard called Yexatai, originally a Corvani engineer, recalled how to build things instead of just destroying them. The palace guards who were supposed to protect the Council began laying down their weapons, not because they were afraid, but because they remembered what they were fighting for, and it was not the Council's continued power. High Counselor Vexatar watched his empire crumble from the palace's highest tower. Around him, the other council members made their own choices. Some, like Counselor Zephyr, refused to accept defeat and activated personal defense systems that would kill them rather than allow capture. Others, like Yathara and Nethara, walked out of the palace with their hands raised, ready to face whatever judgment awaited them. "This cannot be happening," Vexatar whispered, as his crystal body began to crack under the stress of emotions he had not felt in thousands of years. Order cannot fall to chaos. Structure cannot yield to freedom. It is impossible. But it was. Not impossible. It was simply change, and change was the one thing the Council had never learned to handle. Ambassador Ji Woo's final transmission reached every corner of the galaxy. To all beings who hear this message, you are free. Free to choose your own path, free to make your own mistakes, free to build your own future. The age of fear is over. The age of hope has begun. The Council's 10,000-year reign ended not with a bang, but with the simple words that humanity had been saying all along. We choose freedom. 2 years had passed since the fall of the Galactic Council, and the galaxy barely resembled the empire of fear it had once been. On the artificial world of New Geneva Station, representatives from over 300 species gathered in chambers designed not to intimidate, but to welcome. The New Galactic Alliance held its sessions in a building made of crystal and living wood, where natural light streamed through walls that showed the beauty of space, rather than hiding from it. President Sun Ho stood at the podium, looking out, at delegates who represented every corner of known space. Some were former council members who had chosen redemption over resistance. Others were species so long enslaved that they were still learning what it meant to have a voice in their own destiny. 2 years ago, Sun Ho began, his voice carrying easily through the chamber's perfect acoustics. We stood at the edge of our solar system and faced an ultimatum. Submit to fear or face extinction. Today we gather not as conquerors and conquered, but as equals working toward a common future. In the gallery above, children from dozens of different species watched the proceedings with wide eyes. A young Vortok girl sat next to a human boy, while a Merthani child floated in a small tank beside them. They chatted quietly in the universal pigeon language that had emerged naturally as the galaxy learned to communicate as friends rather than masters and slaves. We did not defeat the Council by being stronger or smarter, Sunho continued. We defeated them by refusing to let fear make our decisions for us. We showed the galaxy that courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to do what is right, despite being afraid. At a table near the front, former High Counselor Vextar sat with the human delegation. His crystalline body had lost much of its harsh brightness, now glowing with softer colors that reflected his ongoing struggle to understand concepts like mercy and forgiveness. He had chosen to face trial for his crimes rather than choose death, and the Alliance had chosen rehabilitation over revenge. The human ambassador Dong Wook taught us our first lesson, Vextar said when called upon to speak. His voice still carried traces of that old crystalline authority, but now it was tempered with something that might have been humility. He showed us that the word no has power. I am still learning what it means to earn respect rather than demand submission. The FUR process had not been easy. Some former council members, like Zephyr, had chosen death rather than face a galaxy they could no longer control. Others had fled to the Outer Rim, gathering followers who still believed that fear was the only way to maintain order. But most had chosen the harder path of learning to live in a world where their word was not law. Commander Bo-Ra, now leading the Alliance's peacekeeping forces, delivered the monthly security report. Unlike the Council's enforcers, Alliance peacekeepers carried weapons designed to disable rather than destroy, and their primary mission was protection rather than control. Criminal activity continues to decline across all member systems, she reported. Turns out that people cause less trouble when they are not constantly afraid of their government. Who could have predicted that? Gentle laughter rippled through the chamber. It was a sound that would have been impossible during council rule, when sessions were conducted in fearful silence. But the real changes were happening in the small moments across the galaxy. On Vortak Prime, former mining slaves had transformed their underground tunnels into vast hydroponic farms that fed 3-star systems. They had kept their love of digging and working with their hands, but now they grew food instead of extracting wealth for distant masters. Engineer Hyun-Soo, now serving as agricultural advisor to the Vortak government, watched children play in underground parks where bioluminescent plants provided light that felt like captured sunshine. The children laughed as they climbed on playground equipment built from the same materials that had once been used to make mining tools. Fear kept us in the dark for so long, Gorth told him as they watched the youngsters play. The former overseer had become an elected leader of his people, chosen not for his ability to intimidate, but for his wisdom and kindness. We had forgotten that darkness is only the absence of light, not a thing in itself. On the ocean worlds of the Merthani, similar transformations were taking place. The Sea Dwellers had redirected their tribute fleets into research vessels, exploring the deepest parts of their oceans and discovering wonders that had been hidden for millennia. They shared their findings freely with the galaxy, contributing to a flowering of scientific knowledge that dwarfed anything achieved during the Council's reign. Dr. Eun-jung, now serving as the Alliance's chief xenopsychologist, published papers showing how fear-based societies stunted creativity and innovation. When you are afraid to make mistakes, she wrote, you become afraid to try new things. When you are afraid to try new things, you stop growing. The Council did not just oppress bodies, they oppressed minds. Even the energy beings called the Lumina had found new purpose, no longer trapped in containment fields to power Council. Technology, They had formed partnerships with organic species to explore the deepest mysteries of the universe. Brightwing, the entity who had helped spark their rebellion, now worked with human physicists to develop new forms of faster-than-light travel that would bring the galaxy's scattered peoples closer together. The Clicktor hive minds had perhaps undergone the most dramatic transformation. Instead of breeding perfect soldiers for council armies, they had divided their vast collective consciousness into millions of smaller groups that could think independently while still cooperating when needed. Queen Zixara had willingly reduced her own power, allowing her children to choose their own paths for the first time in their species' history. But the most important changes were happening in the schools and homes where the next generation was growing up. Children who would never know the fear that had shaped their parents were learning to see differences as sources of strength rather than reasons for conflict. On New Geneva Station's education level, Teacher So Young led a class that included students from 12 different species. Today's lesson was about problem solving, and she had given them a challenge that would have been impossible under the old system. Design a city where beings with completely different needs could live together happily. Remember, she told her students as they worked together, there are no wrong answers here, only different solutions to explore. A young human girl named Ah Young worked with a Clicktor drone and a Vortak child to design buildings that could exist both above and below ground. Their solution involved rotating structures that could accommodate surface dwellers during the day and underground dwellers at night. This is impossible, complained a Zenthari boy who was struggling with the concept of cooperation. His people had been individualistic before the council broke them, and he was having trouble learning to work with others. My dad says that impossible is just another word for something nobody has figured out how to do yet, Ah Young replied cheerfully. Besides, 2 years ago everybody said it was impossible to beat the council. The Zenthari boy thought about this for a moment, then asked, how did your people do it? How did humans beat something so big and scary? Ah Young considered the question seriously. It was one that adults had been asking for 2 years, and one that would probably be asked for generations to come. I think, she said slowly, it was because being afraid and giving up are 2 different things. My grandmother used to tell me that being scared just means you are still alive and still fighting. As the day ended, children from across the galaxy went home to families that were learning what it meant to live without fear. They played games in parks where security cameras recorded laughter instead of searching for signs of rebellion. They asked questions that their parents answered honestly, instead of deflecting with warnings about the danger of curiosity. The former fear engine, that massive weapon that had once broadcast terror across star systems, had been converted into something beautiful. Now it served as a lighthouse at the edge of Council space, guiding ships safely through the dangerous nebula that surrounded New Geneva Station. Where once it had projected nightmares, it now offered hope to travelers from the farthest reaches of the galaxy. Ambassador Ji Woo, now serving as the Alliance's chief diplomat, often stood on the station's observation deck and watched ships arriving from newly contacted systems. Each new species that joined the Alliance brought fresh perspectives and capabilities that made everyone stronger. The Council thought fear was their greatest weapon, she reflected during one of her regular reports to Earth. They never realized it was also their greatest weakness. When you rule through fear, you teach everyone exactly what they need to overcome, to be free. Her words were transmitted across the galaxy, carried by the same communication networks that had once spread Council propaganda. But now they carried something different. The simple truth that freedom was possible for anyone, brave enough to reach for it. The galaxy was no longer perfect. Crime still existed, conflicts still arose, and people still made mistakes. But these problems were faced with hope instead of fear, with cooperation instead of dominance, with the understanding that setbacks were opportunities to learn rather than reasons to surrender. The Council had thought fear would stop humanity. They were wrong. Fear had been just the beginning of a journey that led to something greater than any empire, a galaxy where every being could choose their own destiny. And in classrooms and homes across thousands of worlds, children grew up learning the most important lesson humanity had to offer. Being afraid did not mean you were weak. Being afraid and doing the right thing anyway, that was what made you free.